On this exciting episode, who knew the world of canning was filled with such romance and intrigue? Dictatorial ants, stock market funny business, and the DA work of Everett Sloan? We've got that and more in Perry Mason, Season 5, Episode 20, The Case of the Poison Pen Pal. Welcome to the Perry Pod. I'm your humble host, Jonathan Searcy. My purpose, pretty simple, provide an audio companion to every episode of television's greatest legal drama, Perry Mason. Each episode, we give you a summary of the plot. We even compare plots with the Earl Stanley Gardner novel if the episode was an adaptation. We give you a little trivia, reveal the episode's theme, then revel in a Perry proverb. That's a pearl of wisdom from the man himself. Before we head to the water cooler where, just like Perry, Della, and Paul, we can discuss the ins and outs of our fave legal cruise adventures. But first, say it with me, to the law library! Each time we visit the law library, we take a look at a legal conundrum from the episode in order to establish legal precedents for future cases. In today's episode, The Case of the Poison Pen Pal, we encounter the question of child witnesses in murder cases. Here's DA Everett Sloan asking to call a key prosecution witness, Sandra Gregson.
Your Honor, much against its wishes, the state finds it necessary to call a child as witness, Sandra Gregson.
Perry asks for stipulations first. Hey, we don't need her to testify. I'll just agree to some facts. But when Everett Sloan says that won't cut it, Perry asks that the judge move the examination to judicial chambers.
It is essential to the state to have Sandra confront the defendant.
Then I respectfully submit that this testimony be taken in chambers.
Question. What are the real legal guardrails put in place for this kind of thing? Answer. Before a child can testify, the court must determine if the child is competent to do so. This involves assessing whether the child understands the obligation to tell the truth, can receive just impressions of the facts, and then can articulate those facts truly. Most states consider 4 years old to be the minimum age for competency. The Sixth Amendment guarantees defendants the right to confront their accusers. That generally requires witnesses to testify in court. However, closed circuit television testimony can be allowed if it's necessary to protect the child's welfare and the reliability of that child's testimony. Here we get an in-person confrontation in the judge's chambers. Sandra, the child, already knows the defendant, Karen. In fact, Sandra likes Karen. Question for the Perry Mason trivia crew. Have we had a younger court witness than Sandra Gregson? And with that, let's get to the full plot of this episode. The Case of the Poison Pen Pal. Trouble's brewing at Gregson Canneries in San Francisco. They're supposed to merge with Super Brands. You know, Super Brands. The company is 65,000 shares short of what they need to complete the deal. And the stock price has mysteriously risen from $9 to $12 a share, threatening the company with bankruptcy. Tell us what that means, Playboy Lee.
Well, as it stands right now, we're bankrupt if the merger doesn't go through. And we're bankrupt if it does.
Tell us what you think, Matriarch Wilma.
I'm sorry, I just won't buy that.
You never did have sense in judging who could or couldn't be trusted.
President Peter thought he was going to spend some time with his daughter Sandra this weekend. Not now, says Wilma.
Peter, you'd better fly to Chicago. At once.
Not today.
And why not today?
I have some appointments, business appointments. Something very important I can't break.
My secretary has your tickets. You're going to Chicago, Peter.
Plus, Sandra has inadvertently leaked merger info through letters to her pen pal Jill Thatcher. Sandra, no!
Try to remember. Did this Jill ever ask questions? Specific questions about the merger?
Well, let's see. Last week she wrote about how her mother has a friend who knows all about business things and says you must be real smart, Daddy. Only please would I write when this merger thing is going to be. Is that what you wanted to know, Daddy? I keep all her letters if you want me to look up some more.
Peter hires a detective agency to check things out in L.A. That means Paul Drake. Guess who Paul runs into? Karen Ross, Peter's former secretary. Say what? Tensions escalate. Wilma confronts Sandra about her pen pal letters, then locks her in a room. An enraged Peter heads over to Wilma's house. But before he arrives, Wilma is assaulted.
Operator, this is an emergency. Get me an ambulance. Hurry.
Is this the right time to quote Rudyard Kipling, Lee?
Well, the years we waste, and the tears we waste, and the work of her head and hand belong to a woman who did not know and did not understand. Well, isn't anybody going to cry for dear Aunt Wilma?
Oh, shut up, Lee. The hand that fed you is dead. Don't bite it now.
Karen Ross gets arrested for the murder when Wilma doesn't make it through. During the trial, evidence mounts against her. Rental car has blood matching Wilma's type. Her shoe shows traces of blood. And Sandra testifies to seeing Karen leave Wilma's house that night.
Now, what was it you saw?
Karen. She ran out of Aunt Wilma's house and jumped into the car and drove off.
The prosecution then has Peter read letters from Sandra to Jill Thatcher showing a connection between Karen and Jill and a scheme to get insider information, though Matt Clark is involved. But Perry uncovers the real plot, and it doesn't involve Karen or Matt Clark. On the night of her death, Wilma fired both Lee Gregson and Carl Holman, the cannery general manager.
I should warn you that I have here a copy of a telegram shown to one of my investigators by Mr. Sellers' housekeeper. A telegram sent at 10:40 by the deceased. It reads, Peter Gregson no longer satisfactory as president. Both Lee Gregson and Carl Holman fired as of this date. I'm calling board meeting soon to vote in replacement, and it's signed Wilma Gregson.
But Mason knows who he's really after. Carl Holman's wife, Florence.
Mrs. Holman, a year ago, someone made a telephone call to Karen Ross, impersonating Lucy Gregson's voice and ordering Karen to put those specifications in the car. It was you who made that phone call, was it not?
Yes. I thought Peter would get involved in the scandal. A drunken wife, a romance with his secretary, an attempt to betray the company.
You thought if Peter were discharged or in disgrace, your husband would become president of the company.
Well, when Wilma discovered Florence's machinations, tell us what she did.
And she fired Carl, and she threatened to send me to jail, so I had to.
You had to kill her.
With Karen exonerated, she and Peter can marry in Las Vegas, so Paul can just take a chill pill.
You could start by smiling. You should be happy.
As for Sandra, Catalina, here we come. Tell him, Perry.
I'm taking the boat trip with Mr. Mason. Aren't I, Mr. Mason?
You certainly are. You and I, Paul and Della. We're all going to Catalina and back.
Then Sandra unloads a proverb of her own.
Well, don't just stand there. Kiss him.
It's time to get trivial. Each episode in our trivia section, I give you 3 takeaways. A Paul is a subject worth investigating more. Adela is a deep dive on an actor or actress who guest starred in the episode. And finally, a Perry is something we learn about our intrepid hero. Our Paul for this episode concerns the corporate world. The case of the poison pen pal asks us to enter our prompt. What are the real San Francisco canneries? Is that more of a Frisco thing than an LA one? If you find some famous canneries, could you tell us whether or not they were family affairs? Did they ever merge with the big boys? Was there romance and intrigue? Did a lowly relative ever off her aunt after losing her husband to the relentless life of cannery executive status? Tell us what you find, Pauls. Our Della for this episode could be none other than Everett Sloan, aka the Nameless San Francisco DA.
With the court's permission, I would like to introduce this shoe in evidence as People's Exhibit 7.
Here's 10 about Ev. 1. Born Manhattan. Attended PS 46 in Townsend Harris Hall as a red-headed, bespectacled schoolboy. 2. Age 12, declared his determination to become an actor, amazed his contemporaries with his single-mindedness. 3. Received his first paid acting work at the Hedgerow Theater while attending the University of Pennsylvania. 4. Performed at the Cherry Lane Theater in 1928. Began radio work in the early 1930s, where he met Orson Welles. 5. By the late 1930s, was doing intensive radio work, once logging 28 radio sketches in a single week. 6. Achieved critical acclaim for his role as Bernstein in Orson Welles' monumental Citizen Kane, 1941, though the role typecast him for several years. 7. Post-1946 began getting steady work again. Appeared in Lady from Shanghai, another Welles special, and The Big Knife and Patterns, 1955. 8. By 1956, he had appeared in 14 plays, 25 movies, and 50 TV dramas. 9. Married Luba Lovey Hyman, whom he met when she was a student at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts in 1930. They had a son and daughter. Neither of them had Everett Sloan's red hair. 10. Tragic news. Died by suicide August 6th, 1965, age 55. Why? He left 2 notes indicating he had become despondent over his progressive loss of vision from glaucoma. Our Perry for this episode involves our man's vacation plans.
We're all going to Catalina and back.
Fun fact, our man can get to Catalina Island via a ferry boat. If you went today in the year of our Lord 2025, 30 of those ferries leave in a single day. It takes about an hour to get from the LA pier to the island, and voila, Sandra isn't going too big for her first trip out, and I love that Perry, Paul, and Della will act as guides and mentors for young Sandra. The theme for this episode, vulnerability. Sandra's innocence makes her vulnerable to exploitation, and her pen pal correspondence is manipulated by Matt Clark. You can't trust Harry Jackson. Karen Ross's loyalty to Peter and his late wife left her vulnerable to false accusations from Wilma, forcing her to leave her job rather than defend herself against scandal. And even powerful figures show vulnerability. Yeah, Wilma Gregson, you look strong when you flex your authoritarian control, but that also welcomes Florence's murderous rage. You can't protect yourself against that. Perry protects the vulnerable well, especially when the individual is unjustly attacked. Written statements, oral arguments, there's no poison pen of persuasion he doesn't have an antidote for. And with that, let's get to a Perry proverb. Our Perry proverb comes from inside the judge's chambers. Sandra has just received advice from the court, and Perry chimes in.
If it's the truth, Sandra, you mustn't hold back.
Tell the truth, Sandra, and you'll be ahead of 95% of Perry Mason characters. That's a proverb. And with that, it's time to grab a sip from the water cooler.
Now, there is one thing I don't understand.
Go on, Paul.
Each time we head to the water cooler, I give you deleted scenes, bits from the episode that didn't quite make the final cut. 1, Wilma keeps canceling her staff's increasingly important appointments just to show them who's boss. What's that, Carl? You've won the Nobel Peace Prize. You'll have to accept it in absentia. We're taking meetings with Del Monte that day. Number 2, Ben Willoughby spends his entire day loitering at LAX just in order to potentially bump into and unsettle his business rivals. It's a strange strategy, but it seems to work. Number 3, Paul pitches Candyland to Perry after this case is said and done. We'll be millionaires, Perry. It's got tomato sauce Splash Mountain, the Jolly Green Giant Ferris wheel, and the Cream Corn Rapids. We can build it right here in the canned capital of the world, San Francisco. Our Paul from the last episode, the case of the glamorous ghost, involved the status of wholesale jewelry dealers in 2025. Are there any Homer Corbins among us? Dad Drake wrote, quote, "The world of gem dealing is more regulated and digital in 2025. There are still independent gem dealers who operate on trust, reputation, and personal relationships among long-established dealers, collectors, and traders. Some do business with a handshake, relying on mutual trust. They are common in certain traditional markets, like those in Bangkok, Jaipur, and Antwerp." Close quote. Aunt Mai, PI, suggested we check out Oscar Heyman and Brothers, a prominent 1960s wholesale jeweler. And here's what I found when I took her advice. Oscar Heyman and Bros were known as the jeweler's jeweler. They produced jewelry for many prestigious retailers, worked with companies like Cartier, Van Cleef & Arpels, Marcus & Co., and Tiffany & Co. They were in LA during the 1960s and were the leading jewelers of Hollywood. So, were you wondering who would have supplied the real jewels for an episode like The Case of the Glamorous Ghost? Had that pile of jewels been real? Probably Oscar Heyman and Bros. Sorry, Homer Corbin and daughters. You're out of luck. Thanks, Pauls. As always, I'd love to hear from you. Have a comment on the episode or the pod in general? Why don't you drop me a line at theperrypod@gmail.com. Next time, we have more corporate intrigue. Mining companies, an old matriarch paying a visit, a 7-year-old, a shoebox filled with cash, and a dead general manager. Beware, Susan Fisher. Get Perry on the line. It's the case of the mystified miner. Join us, won't you? Until then, this is Jonathan Searcy saying, keep on walking that Park Avenue beat.